Hi everybody, welcome back to the Pokemon Care Guides. Today we will be wrapping up the Kanto starter Pokemon with the water type Squirtle and its evolutions. Now, these little guys are freaking adorable. Squirtle is just this small, bipedal, blue, turtle-esque creature whose entire torso is covered by a shell that is brown on the top and a light, almost cream color on the bottom. They have these stubby little legs and arms with this big round head and small curly tail. And honestly, that description could fit the entire evolutionary line. While bigger, a Wartortle has the same basic shape as a Squirtle. It's just that its tail becomes covered in this smooth, water resistant hair, and it gains these almost wing like ears that it uses to help swim. Oh, and it jumps from Squirtle's 1.5 feet tall and 20 pounds up to 3 feet tall and 50 pounds. But once it evolves again, it loses that tail and ears and instead gets two massive cannons that sit on Blastoise's shoulders, extending out of the shell and over its arms. Blastoise shoots up to an average height of just over 5 feet tall and gains another 130 pounds, most of which is its shell. But, like I said, it keeps the same basic shape through all of its evolutions. Blue skin, round head, torso encased in a brown and cream shell. Honestly, out of the three Kanto starter Pokemon, I would say that this is the one that changes the least as it evolves. At least it makes it easy to identify. And now that you have a good idea of the Pokemon that we will be working with, let's get into the details and see if this is the perfect Pokemon partner for you. Enclosure. If I had to rank the enclosures of the three Kanto starter Pokemon on how tough and expensive they were to build and keep, Bulbasaur would be the easiest, Charmander would be the hardest, and Squirtle would be sitting right in the middle of that. It won't need the extensive terraforming that a Charmander will, but you'll have to put in more work than just letting your Bulbasaur wander around your yard all day. After all, Squirtle is a water type, and most water types will need water, obviously. Now, the amount and size of the water differs with each Pokemon species. You can have a Pokemon like Quagsire, which honestly just needs a wet patch of mud that it can lay in. Or you can have a Wailord, which you will not be keeping anywhere but the actual ocean. Squirtle, thankfully, is not that extreme. A small lake would be perfect for all three of the evolutions. It would provide an excellent amount of space for even a Blastoise. Now, let's say that you don't have a full-on lake on your land like most people. Well, by the time you get a Blastoise, you will need to get a decent-sized in-ground pool, about 25 meters in length, and the majority of which will need to be between 10 to 15 feet in depth. Plenty of space for your massive turtle to swim around in. But if you're short on money or space when you first get your Pokemon, there is another option for the younger evolutions. With a Squirtle and a Wartortle, you may be able to get away with an above ground pool, one of the larger ones. This will provide enough space for your Pokemon to swim around and exercise in the water without breaking your bank. And yeah, it may seem like a lot of space for your tiny Squirtle before it evolves, and you're right, it is a bit big, but trust me when I say that it'll make your lives easier when it evolves into a Wartortle to have the pool already set up for it. A couple things to keep in mind if you're going to use the pool method though. Do not put any cleaning chemicals in it like chlorine. These can be really bad for your Pokemon's health and cause all kinds of problems. This will mean that things like algae will start to grow in the pool, and the water will turn green. So, to prevent that, I would get one of those underwater vacuums that cleans the bottom of the pool, and some form of filter to keep the water from getting stagnant and gross. You will also need a dry place near the water where your Pokemon can dry off and just hang out near the water's edge. This will also provide them with an easy way to get in and out of the water if they need to. With water Pokemon, you always need to keep in mind that there are generally two types. The fully aquatic ones that need to always stay in the water, and the semi-aquatic ones that do need the water but can't live in it at all times. The Squirtle line is semi-aquatic, so whatever enclosure you build for them will require a way for them to leave the water at any point. If you're using an above ground pool, then I would highly suggest building a deck alongside it to function as this little dry off patch. For the in-ground pool that Blastoise needs, just make one side a shallow ramp that leads out of the pool. With their large, bulky shell and proportionally small legs, a Blastoise won't be able to jump out of the water like a Squirtle will, so the ramp needs to go all the way to the end of the pool. Lastly are the Pokemon that can be housed alongside the Squirtle evolutions. The easy answer is other Squirtle evolutions. They don't have the intense territorial behavior of the Charmander evolutions, and even enjoy hanging out together in a nest. Yes, that is the right collective noun, I looked it up, of turtles, even as Blastoise. The only thing to consider is that for each of these Pokemon you get, you will need to double the space requirements that I mentioned earlier. For Squirtle, that's not a big deal. You can realistically fit up to 4 of them in one of those above ground pools without it being detrimental to their health. But for Wartortle, and especially Blastoise, you'll need to double what I said above. Like I said in the past 2 care guides, evolved Pokemon tend to take up a lot of space. Aside from that, fish Pokemon can be housed in the water with your Squirtle evolutions as long as you have the space requirements met for the fish as well. Care guides for those will be out in the future. Just keep in mind that the Squirtle line are all omnivorous, meaning they eat both plant and meat. So if you have any fish that are small enough for them to fit into their mouth, they will eat them. I would suggest things like Magikarp and Feebas. They are 2 species that are big enough to not get eaten, but weak enough that they won't pose a danger to your Squirtle. Just be sure to seed the bottom of the enclosure with a few Everstones to keep these Pokemon from evolving. It might delay your Squirtle from evolving somewhat, but since they only spend some of their time in the water, they will still evolve. Trust me, a delay in getting a Wartortle or a Blastoise is much better than suddenly having to take care of a Gyarados or a Milotic. I know those care guides aren't out yet, but trust me when I say that you'll need a lot more space than the pools I've recommended here. Availability. Just like the other 2 Kanto starter Pokemon, Squirtle unfortunately suffers from the availability problems. Luckily, their catch window in the SPC isn't nearly as small as Charmander's is. In fact, Squirtle may be the easiest to find in the wild as long as you know where to look. Squirtle like to live in and near lakes and ponds, both of which have plenty of underwater hiding areas and murky water that a Squirtle can easily use to hide in. This means that out of the 3 Kanto starter Pokemon, a Squirtle is most likely to be missed or overlooked by a trainer wandering around in the wilderness. So camping out the shore of a lake in the Kanto region and watching to see if any Squirtles appear on the shore might just give you the chance for a wild Squirtle. It's a very, very low chance because, like I said in the last 2 starter videos, wild starter Pokemon get caught pretty much the instant that a shiny hunter releases them. But if you are too old for the starter program and can't afford one from the few breeders that produce them, then staking out a lake might give you the chance to catch one. As always, my recommendation is to either sign up for the government starter program or to pay someone to sign up for you. Sure, you might have to wait some time for them to breed enough to fill up to your order, but it is still a guaranteed Pokemon. Care. Unlike the other 2 Kanto starters, the care for Squirtle and its evolutions involves a lot more care for its enclosure as opposed to the Pokemon itself. For a Bulbasaur and a Charmander, you set up the enclosure and then just do minor maintenance on it. But with water Pokemon in general, their enclosures need constant upkeep. The number one thing is that you need some sort of circulation system. This is the one thing that you must have, even if you are using a lake instead of the pool. It will help keep the water from becoming stagnant, gross, and full of disease. Standing water turns into bad water. You can get a sort of fountain to go into the center of your lake that will help stir up the water. Or if you're using a pool, most of them come with their own circulation and filtration systems. That's as much as you'll have to do for the lake, but the pool will need constant skimming to try and keep the water from filling with dirt, leaves, and waste from your Pokemon. Even with this, if you're using the pool, you'll have to drain the pool around once a month in order to change out the water. Remember, no chemicals in the water to clean it. They can be harmful to your Pokemon's health, but this means that even with the circulation and the skimming, the water will eventually start to turn green. Once it reaches a point where you can no longer see the bottom of the pool through the water, it's time to change the water. Of course, if you're using a lake, You don't have to do that. The lake water is going to be filthy no matter what, and it will have the ecosystem to keep the water healthy. Moving on to the Pokemon itself, food is going to be fairly easy to handle. As I said before when talking about the fish that can live with them, the Squirtle evolutions are omnivorous, meaning they can eat both meat and berries. Now, I prefer to feed only berries when I can. I can grow my own, they aren't very expensive if you need to buy a ton of them, they're easier to keep fresh, but if you decide to feed your Squirtle meat, then that's absolutely fine. Either way, your average Squirtle will need about 1.5 cups of food per day. As I mentioned in my Bulbasaur video, the berries that I like to use are the Spellin and Cornberries. Mash them up into a kind of fruit paste when they're younger, as it'll be easier for them to eat. As they get closer to becoming a Wartortle, you can instead slice the fruit into small chunks for them to eat. Meat-wise, I would suggest Magikarp, as it's a very common meat for people to get a hold of, and they are the natural prey of Squirtle in the wild. No need to cook it or anything, just slice it into cubes that are about half the size of the Pokemon's mouth, just to make sure that there isn't a possibility of them choking. They don't have teeth after all, so they tend to either swallow something whole or take a big bite out of something and then swallow that bite whole. Oh, and one thing I would like to add before moving on to the other evolutions, Squirtle's shell is made out of hardened bone that extends from its spine and its rib cage. To ensure that these bones grow nice and strong, it's important to make sure that a Squirtle gets a decent level of calcium in its diet. The way they do this in the wild is by eating the bones of their prey, but that can present a major choking hazard to your Pokemon, and there are plenty of people out there that find feeding your Pokemon bones to be kinda disturbing. An easy workaround for this is dusting the food that you're going to feed it with calcium powder. You can get it from most Pokemon care stores, and just a light sprinkling over the food will be plenty for any of the evolutions. For a Wartortle, the amount of food will almost double, going up to 2 and 2/3 of a cup of food, whether it be berries or meat. The meat you can leave in larger chunks now, and the fruit can just be sliced up, or if your Wartortle is big enough when it's closer to evolving, then you can just feed them the whole berry. Still going to need to dust it with the calcium powder though. As they grow and evolve, they use the calcium to grow and repair their shell, so it's very important that they have enough of that to do so. Blastoise is another one of the big boy third evolutions, and as such requires a truly massive amount of food. Based on the average weight of a Blastoise, you'll be feeding them an incredible 7.5 cups of food. At this point, you can just start throwing whole fruit into the water for them. While they do take the most food and most space to care for, feeding the final evolution does tend to be the easiest, and at least to me, the most fun. I mean, just walking up and chucking food into an enclosure for some big, powerful Pokemon is very satisfying. But throwing full fruit into the pool for your Blastoise has benefits and drawbacks. One good thing is that it also acts as playtime for your Pokemon. It having to chase down and catch the fruit bobbing in the water's surface is a good enrichment activity for them. The downside is that not only do Blastoise still need the calcium supplement with their food to help with the shell health, but since they evolve with cannons, they also need iron supplements as well. With how high pressure the water coming out of those cannons is, they can get worn down over time. The iron supplements will make sure that Blastoise always have a good internal supply of iron to heal them. If you plan on just chucking the fruit into the pool, that will wash off any supplement powder on them, and instead of your Pokemon eating it, it will instead just gunk up the water. You'll have to buy these supplement pills and either jam them inside the fruit before feeding, or give them to your Blastoise directly. Personally, I would just put them in the fruit. Less hassle. But if you're feeding them meat, then you can just keep the powder. I wouldn't recommend throwing meat into the water the same way as the fruit. If your Blastoise isn't hungry when you first throw it in the water, then the water will saturate the meat, make it all soggy and gross, and it'll start to deteriorate and break apart. Then the water gets all gross, and you'll need it to be changed, and it's just honestly best to keep the meat out of the water. But hey, that does mean that you can keep using the powdered supplements. Grooming will also be a big part of taking care of your Pokemon. Now, you might be wondering, grooming? Grooming what? It's not like Squirtle has any hair that needs to be brushed. And you would be right about that, but they do have a shell. You see, as they spend a bunch of time just relaxing near or even in the water, their shells will end up getting gross. Algae will start to form in the creases of the shell's plates and, if left long enough, can spread across the rest of the shell. This can become a serious health concern as it traps in water and can cause the shell to begin to rot. Just a weekly brushing with soap and a stiff bristle brush will be good enough to clean it off. Small things, but needed. For a war turtle specifically, it has that tail and the ears that will need to be brushed. They can get tangled and won't dry properly if left that way. Just some Pokemon safe soap and conditioner with a brush can take care of this problem. Blastoise again has that shell that will need to be brushed, but its cannons will also need to be scrubbed clean. If you have water with a lot of minerals in it, then that can cause a buildup of mineral deposits in the barrels of its cannons when leftover water dries. If not dealt with, then eventually these could lead to a blocked cannon and a trip to the Pokemon Center to get rid of it. Two things can be done to deal with this. The first is to skip the problem altogether by buying a massive filter that you can install in your Pokemon's enclosure that will filter out all the minerals out of the water. It just prevents all the buildup to begin with. But buying the system itself and all the replacement filters can get expensive, especially since you'll be changing it often due to the amount of water you'll be filtering. The second way to get rid of the buildup is constant scrubbing with a stiff wire brush and, mind, this may sound a little weird, but normal berry juice. Yeah, that really sour, bright yellow berry. Its juice is really good at dissolving crusted on things, like the mineral buildups in a Blastoise's cannons, as long as you don't get the kind that's marketed towards kids. They add a ton of sugar to it to make it more sweet than sour, and it can dilute the effectiveness as a cleaning agent. Just pour enough juice over it to cover the entire affected area, and then give it a good, vigorous scrubbing with the wired brush. The minerals should start to break up, and then, when you're done, have your Blastoise fire its cannons to clear out all the debris and berry juice. Then, if there are still some leftover buildups after that, repeat until clean. Afterward, just to stay on top of it, it's best to use the berry juice about once a week to keep it from getting built up again. If there are no mineral deposits in the cannon, then just one fruit's worth of juice should be enough to coat the entirety of the inside of the cannon. Funny enough, you can also use this technique to clean your pipes in your house, so at least there's that. Cost. Since we're talking about another starter Pokemon, the cost is going to be very high. Finding a breeder for Squirtle, while not as hard as finding a Charmander breeder, is going to be difficult. For water Pokemon, the large ones at least, it tends to be easier and cheaper to find them in the wild than to breed them. It requires a lot of space and habitat construction. So, in essence, if you do find a breeder, you'll be paying a lot not just because of how rare Squirtle is, but also because it's expensive to simply house enough to sustain a breeding population. Take it from me, breeders have to pay bills too. Speaking of the enclosure, that is definitely going to be in the very high category as well. On one hand, you'll have to buy, set up, and then maintain multiple different kinds of pools. Between the price of the pool, the permits needed to build them, the additions to your water bill from draining and filling it once a month or so, and actually building the things, you're looking at a hefty price tag. On the other hand, you need to buy a house that has access to a lake on your land, which, whew, is probably going to be the most expensive thing I'm ever going to mention on these guides. Now, I'm not going to get into the housing market on these shows. It's called Pokemon Care Guides, not House Care Guide. But in my inexperienced opinion, if you really want to buy a lakefront house just to raise a Squirtle, then check the Sinnoh region. They have a ton of lakes here, and they're bound to have at least one house for sale near one. But again, it will probably be cheaper just to raise your Squirtle in a pool. The food, supplement, and grooming supplies altogether will be a monthly moderate expense when taken all together. After all, you will always need to buy food. You'll need to buy more soap and more normal berry juice as time goes on. Luckily, you can get all of these things in bulk, cutting down the price on everything. If you want to cut the price down and are willing to put the work in, you can grow your own berries to mitigate the cost completely. But if you are planning on using meat, be prepared for it to be a bit more expensive. Meat always costs more than fruit and veggies. Out of everything, the supplements will probably be the most expensive things you have to keep buying, but again, if you buy them in bulk, they tend to be cheaper and they take forever to go bad, as long as you keep them in a sealed container. And then the brushes you'll need for grooming can be picked up from any old Pokemon care shop or even ordered online. In total, the initial investment of getting a Squirtle is going to be a big one. A lot of capital will go into getting it and then setting up its enclosure. Almost a prohibitive amount of capital. But once you have all that set, then the day to day care shouldn't cost you much at all. Altogether, I'm going to have to place Squirtle and its evolutions in the very high category of pricing. These starter Pokemon are no joke to get a hold of and care for. Conclusion. Overall, I don't think that the Squirtle line is a bad Pokemon to have. They are easy to care for and generally have a friendly and playful temperament. On a personal level, I think that they're my favorite out of the three Kanto starter Pokemon. But coming from a professional standpoint as a breeder, they take a lot of investment just to keep properly outside of a Pokeball. The enclosure and, of course, getting the Pokemon is a royal pain. It's the reason why there are so few breeders like me out there trying to breed and sell them. But ignoring that, they are a fantastic evolutionary line. The few that I've interacted with have been wonderful Pokemon. And hopefully, if you get one, will turn out to be your perfect Pokemon partner. Thank you for tuning in, and please join us next time when we leave behind the starter Pokemon and dive into the bug Pokemon Caterpie.